So welcome to Upside, where we talk all things European venture, startups and investing, digging into the real stories behind the tech headlines. Today it's Mads and myself from SuperSeed, joined by Ben Prade, a partner at the growth investment firm GP Bullhound. Now, GP looks like they've got nearly $1 billion AUM, and by the looks of things, have invested in every cool tech household name under the sun. Ben, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, hey guys. Well, great to be part of it. I've been listening to the podcast for the last few weeks and I really love what you guys are doing.
You're the listener, you and my mum.
So GP Bullhound, it may be a name that pops out to some of you in the kind of tech industry. So we've been around about 20, 25 years. We're an interesting beast, actually, because we are probably more predominantly known as an advisory house, and we've been doing M&A for tech founders across Europe and the US for the last, like I say, 20, 25 years. And that's allowed us to build a big office network. You know, we're 12 offices. We're in Asia now as well. But I guess what's maybe a little bit less known is that we're building an investment business alongside that for the last 10, 15 years. I'm a bit different to you guys. We're a little bit more of a growth stage investor, I would say. I know you guys like the early days.
This is what Europe needs, right? I mean, we need more GP Bullhounds. I think, no one's going to argue with that. We need more growth beyond the pre and the seeds.
That's right. Yeah. And again, I think our portfolios are probably a little bit more concentrated as well. So, we're only investing in maybe 10 companies per fund, getting very hands-on with those companies. So, we'll often find they'll have a great early stage VC like yourselves in there, but then we're taking that baton on to really help internationalize them. If you're going to go global, you have to break the US, right? And we're a good partner for that with the 2 offices over there. And then myself, I was a kind of more traditional investment banker for many years, hedge funds, trading, all that kind of jazz. Made the jump about kind of 8-10 years ago into tech. I sit on the IC, so I get involved in the investments, but really my day job is fundraising, which has been an interesting process.
We're going to dig into that. Many of our listeners are founders, and I really want to dig into what goes on behind the scenes, which you're hopefully gonna share all the dirty secrets. So that'll be super cool. But Mads, listen, first up, how's your week been? You've been away. You've been fabulousing in the mountains. What's new with you?
I've had a great week in the mountains. There's just nothing quite like the Alps, and we had terrific weather this year. Lots of snow right before we came, and then a week of sunshine. But temperature's cold enough to keep the snow powdery. It's really enjoyed that. In the meantime, we were able to do 2 term sheets this week, so got some investment done as well.
Just while you were shushing down the slopes, just signing a term sheet on your mobile phone.
I just need to go away more.
I bet the family loves that when you're out there doing term sheets when you should be with the kids.
Yeah. And with 4 daughters, yeah.
What are lifts for, right?
There you go. No, if we can do a few deals going up the mountain, why not? What else has been on your mind? So you've had some other thoughts. Do share.
Yeah. So something that happened tail end of last week was the Munich Security Conference. It was really interesting that there was this talk from JD Vance that was kind of left many in Europe a bit shell-shocked. And I actually going back over the talk and listening to it, I mean, it's easy to get swept away by the media narrative about how horrible he was to Europeans. And I think there's clearly, when you think about the kind of the U.S. policy right now, we're European focused, but what's happening in Washington is very relevant to us because it influences, kind of everything right now on a global basis. And I think there were some things he got wrong and probably also some things he got right in the speech. And so firstly, maybe some of the context. So, there are potential accords on the horizon with Russia, which is, you could say it's maybe not the, ideal situation from a European perspective that the US sort of seems to have done a 180 in terms of, who are really the allies and what are their objectives. And then there's also a potential trade accord with China. This is a little bit more speculative, but there is speculation that Trump really is trying to do a big trade deal with China that will sort of completely upend the global trade flows. And so on top of that, Trump has also said, look, we got to cut defense spending. We sort of got to try and go for global disarmament, which in many ways is a laudable goal. If you think about some of the things maybe that the speech got right, I think there is this talk about freedom of speech. And freedom of speech is important. It's kind of not to condone terror or subversion of the state, but to discuss and find insights. And I think there is an argument that maybe the pendulum in Europe has swung a little bit too much in the wrong direction, where we've become a little bit too cautious about really letting people speak, even when we disagree with what they say. I think there's another element that was really interesting coming out of the talk, which is, okay, so let's say that the US policy is no longer to be the sort of quote unquote global policeman, but to pull back from some of those duties they've taken over in the past. We can either see that as a terrible loss in Europe, or we can see that as a bit of a wake-up call to be in charge of our own destiny. And if you think about Europe today, the European economy, even excluding the UK, but the EU economy is 10 times the size of the Russian economy. And so, add UK to that, it won't take a whole lot for us, I think, to match Russian level of military capability. And I think there is something about sort of saying, look, we're not expecting the daddy that's the US, kind of our parent, to come to our rescue. No, we've got to grow up, be in charge of our own destiny, and make sure we have the capabilities we need to defend our sovereignty, our security, the safety of our citizens. And I think if we take that mindset, maybe something good could come out of this. Maybe we could be a little bit more forward-looking. What will it take for us to be, autonomous, not just from a defense perspective, but also technologically, and able to carry our own weight in the world? And yeah, so that was my perspective of that. There's a lot more we can go into around what does it mean for European defense, what's happening with the UK and AI, and we can unpack that as we go.
We're definitely gonna go there later across multiple topics. Ben, what's been keeping you up this week? What's been on your mind?
Well, a little bit of that kind of stuff. I do agree with Mads. I think this is an opportunity for Europe. I wonder sometimes with these speeches that are made, how much strategy there is behind it and how much there's just looking for impact, looking for headlines. That's the only thing that bothers me. But if it comes to a good point for Europe and we take our destiny back in our own hands, I think that's great. I thought there was some really interesting points you guys made a couple of weeks ago about the US almost kind of wanting Europe to be beholden to them from a defense point of view, to be able to kind of get this political power that it's had over the world. And it'll be interesting as the US pulls back, who will fill those voids. I think there's clearly an opportunity for China to get more involved. In fact, I saw this week, I think there's a new tender out by the Hong Kong government to invest in VC funds across Europe. You would think, well, that's an interesting thing to do. Why are you doing that? And I think there's not, perhaps there's a void there to be filled by Chinese money in certain locations, which will build goodwill. And in the long run, that's a shame for the US, right? Because I think it loses that soft power that it has across the world. And it does bring a lot of justice and a lot of good things. So we'll have to see how that develops over the long term. I think the US is a long-term loser on that front. But, I think it's a great opportunity. It's a great time for Europe to, as you say, stand on its own 2 feet and prove what it can do.
Well, the Trump administration is definitely making everybody much more concerned about their own defense, security, their own standing in the world. Is the JD Vance rhetoric and the Trump admin, is it changing the way that you view deals? Are you looking at more defense, for example?
Clearly, the amount of money coming into defense, you can't ignore. And we can get onto this when we talk about fundraising. If you're raising a fund and you're telling people you're going to invest in defense, you are more likely to raise a fund right now, which means more money.
It's not just AI, because I think most people would assume that, if you put AI on your pitch deck, you're going to fundraise. But we've got a new game in town, the defense game, right?
That's right. And these things come and go. Quantum's another one. But sure as hell, if you're going to say, oh, you're going to raise a fund in marketplaces, you're not going to raise that fund, right? Even if that might be the best strategy out there from an investor point of view. So for sure, these massive themes, that the link to geopolitics is having an impact on the ground in what we're all investing in and what we're looking at.
I've not seen this. I mean, maybe I've had my head in the sand, but I've not seen at a government level so much potential impact for our industry affecting AI defense, almost coming full stack down the stream to create different strategies. I think it's an exciting time to be alive. But Ben, you've been out on the fundraising tip. You've been out speaking to LPs to invest in your latest fund, which I think you just closed 300 mil?
300 million, yeah. We did another 300 million.
So tell us a little bit about what your impression of the response from LPs, what they're looking at, how the ecosystem is feeling from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess it's important to go back a few years to think about what's happened, I guess, over the last 10 years or so. There was obviously a great time for VC kind of post 2012, all the way through to 2022. You had a whole food chain operating, early stage funds, growth stage funds, late stage funds, and importantly, an IPO market that was functioning. This was allowing companies to make good investments and then get their cash back out and send that cash back to LPs. That
this
drove
is one
good
thing
returns.
that we talk about quite a lot, which is founders especially, I don't think they fully appreciate that whole stack, that full recycling. If our investors aren't taking returns, they're not able to recycle in the next generation of VC funds and startups. So that is incredibly important. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's an incredibly important part of our ecosystem that basically stopped, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I think it stopped for a few reasons. Clearly, it got overheated. COVID came along. I mean, it poured, rocket fuel onto the whole system. People sat at home. Certain types of technology companies just went through the roof. We also had, zero interest rates at that time, free cash into the system. Everything got overblown. And then we saw, the big blow up in the markets. Once inflation went up, interest rates went up, the markets hit a full stop and came flying down. And then in our industry, private market valuations of our companies tend to mirror the listed market valuations quite quickly these days. It's not even that big a lag. So you had this horrible moment in 2022, 2023, where we were all reducing the valuations of the companies that we were holding in our funds. So all these funds that were looking super, super good on paper, suddenly were looking a lot more realistic in terms of valuations. That coincided with this big ramp up of people coming into the industry. So new funds being launched on the back of this, this great run that we'd had in the late 2010s. The amount of funds out there just grew massively. And of course, it was fine that the money was coming into the system from new investors who were getting sucked into VC, who potentially maybe shouldn't have been there. But there was so much news around that. Now, of course, you've got a situation where a lot of new funds raised their first fund, 2020, 21, 22, invested at the top of the market. And, now those valuations are looking pretty toppy. They don't have the track record. They're coming back to market now. And it's like, well, can you give me another $1 billion, please? But, the money from the last fund has done absolutely nothing. And it sure as hell isn't coming back to anyone in cash terms anytime soon. So as the IPO market has just died, it means that the cash isn't flooding back into the system. And let's be honest, most funds are delivering almost zero DPI back. A lot of LPs just don't need VC in their portfolio.
Yeah. Our LPs tend to do publics. They'll have, some property. They'll do their philanthropic stuff. And then VCs, it almost feels like the afterthought. It's like 1% to 2% of AUM. I don't know if that's possibly not the space you play in, I imagine.
No, it is. I mean, we had investors all the way from entrepreneurs all the way through to institutions. I think, what has happened also for the institutional investors, a lot of that cash was coming from the US. It was the biggest investor in VC, and some of that was coming into Europe. Now, since the revaluation in tech, the leading light in technology has been the AI boom in the US, the Magnificent Seven. And then off the back of that, the private companies in the AI space in the US have been doing very well also. So now that big pool of capital in the US is not really looking beyond the US borders, which has been another problem for Europe, is that US investors, it's very hard, let's be honest, for a European fund to go to the US and attract investment when they've got such a big technology ecosystem over there. And that has sucked some of the fuel out of European VC. So what has filled the gap from what used to be maybe US pension fund money is government money. And I think a lot of governments across the world have seen the potential for technology to allow them to have a domestic economic policy to create jobs, to attract people to their region. And the way they're accessing that is through VC funds. So, I think there's a good opportunity for European funds to work with foreign governments, both in Europe and across the world. I think to your point about government getting more involved, I think VCs these days to attract funding have to do more than just say, give me some money and I'll give you some money back in 4 years' time. They need to work very closely with the LPs in terms of knowledge sharing, ecosystem building, to gate that money, to bring that money in. So if you're a new VC right now going out to raise a fund, you need to think, I need to really focus on a particular sector, whether it's AI or whether it's defense. I need to have some deep expertise in that particular sector. And I need to go out and show LPs how I can work with them to educate them around that sector.
Quickly on the M&A IPO piece, is your sense that 25 is going to open up more of all? It feels like that anecdotally, but I think you're closer to the fire than we are. Are you sensing that that's happening?
We're sensing it's happening. It's not coming as quickly as everyone hoped. I have to admit, even Klarna, for instance, we know we're investors in Klarna from a couple of our funds. It's a fantastic company. They've been talking about the IPO. It's maybe looking like April, May now that they may IPO. I think that'll be a huge bellwether for what happens next. But even they've taken their time. So whether 2025 is the big dawn or not, I suspect maybe 26, 27 really.
It feels like AI specifically has accelerated the recovery, has accelerated LPs being back in the black, this slight liquidity push being then unevenly distributed because of geopolitical tensions. And I'm also hearing anecdotally a lot of Italian government money going into VC funds and being released with a very specific focus on Italian startups, and a little bit going on in Spain. So it just feels like this nationalist populist push, especially from the government level, is now creating a few more engines and fires in local economies, which I don't think is a bad thing, but I'd love to see how this all comes to pass. Now, Mads, have you got any reflections on what Ben has been saying, or any thoughts about our experience of the fundraising environment in Europe?
I think Ben charted the path perfectly. It's what we've all seen and lived through. You had a bubble in 2021, 22. The bubble burst and has been deflating. The recovery from that bubble has taken longer than people wanted or were hoping for. I think there has been a lot of focus on public markets. It's I think maybe for the first time you've been able to play this new tech wave of AI through public markets, which many people have been doing. But that said, AI is clearly a subsector within the venture capital ecosystem and startups where things are happening, and a lot is happening, and valuations are relatively high, dollars are flowing, investments are being made, and capital is being raised. And the truth is, we're just never going to go back. And I think, the insight is if you're building good companies, you'll always be able to raise capital. There's always money for good businesses. And that's been the experience even in 2023, which was not a great year.
Let's have a chat about the future and how Europe and LPs and VCs and startups and that connective tissue, how we think that's going to progress over the next 2, 5, 10 years. But first, just for a little bit of background context. So last year, Germany, France, and the UK, the VCs there invested around $25 billion. Across all of Europe, that was about $45 billion compared to the States, which was $200 billion. So still a fair track behind. Now, over the past decade, European VC has yielded a net IRR, so internal rate of return, of 20.8%, beating the US at 18.2%. So European funds have outperformed on an IRR basis. European VC has consistently outperformed public markets, delivering a net annual return of 23% over the last 10 years. And the share of global VC has gone up from 5% 20 years ago to 20% in 2023. So there's a lot to be positive about in the European ecosystem. But Ben, if you were crystal balling and looking to the future, and I love your optimism because you always struck me as this kind of super positive, optimistic guy in our industry. What do you see? Where are the opportunities? Where are you investing? Where are you playing? And how do you perceive the world?
Yeah, I think for us, we do invest across Europe. You mentioned Italy, you mentioned Spain. Spain is a very interesting region for us. We do a lot of investment in Spain. We have a lot of investment into our fund from Spain, from the stakeholders in government all the way through. I think if you look at the companies in the 2010s that were taking off, it was more kind of gaming, it was social media, it was e-commerce. It's not the dream of tech. Now you're seeing AI, you're seeing quantum, you're seeing some really deep tech coming through. And I think that's really a positive thing for Europe because we do have fantastic universities and institutions. That's a strategic advantage for us. And as the governments become more conscious of that and building funding around those institutions, I think it's a huge opportunity for us, not just Cambridge and Oxford, but across Europe. the culture around work in Europe probably has to adapt a little bit. They have to work hard. They have to be in the office. They have to be working 7 days a week. So that is coming in Europe. It's improving compared to the US. But, with this government money coming into the ecosystem, we all know the wonderful job that European Investment Fund has done, but has always been a little bit more of a silent investor into funds, letting funds do their thing. But as these governments get more involved, one of the huge benefits is for our portfolio companies, the connections we have with governments is really, really powerful, because we can start bringing our portfolio companies to governments, maybe think about how is that government going to build its own AI infrastructure? Maybe our portfolio company can be a customer to the government. That's a real interesting thing. So as all of this political goodwill and pushing and shoving starts to come to a strategy, I think that's a huge opportunity for you.
I think people often don't fully appreciate how much the private markets and VC and startups and the tech industry has been supported by the US government. I think Europe gets a bad rep where it's kind of put down often by the amount of government money that goes in, but there's a huge amount of government money that goes in from the US into private markets and into supporting the tech industry. I think it's really important to see this. This isn't a European thing, government money. This is a global thing. Well, let's move into quantum. There was news this week from Microsoft. After 20 years of research, it's hailed as a new paradigm in quantum, and we're going to get into each of our cynicism about this in a second. The Majorana 1 chip, which is the world's first quantum processor powered by a topological core architecture, meaning that quantum is more reliable and scalable. So Satya is saying that this new state of matter is pivotal for achieving more stable qubits. It's become a bit of a PR sesh from Microsoft this week. Mads, do you want to kick off on the quantum tip?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I mean, look, you have all the usual naysayers, and it's easy to be skeptical, of course. Does it work? Is it a genuine breakthrough? Or is it just another Theranos? There's always plenty of that. But for a moment, let's just assume that this does work. And maybe the context around why quantum is useful. There's a lot of stuff you can do with quantum computing that you can't do with traditional computing, around encryption, which we all know can be used to potentially crack the RSA algorithm, which means we're going to have to think about different ways to encrypt things. But also in things like finance, you can optimize portfolios because you can simulate trillions of options in parallel. You can use it to optimize supply chains. You can use it in AI. Quantum linear algebra, which is what we can do when we have quantum computing, will enable us to train vastly bigger models in a fraction of the time once we get it to work. Now, the challenge is that the quantum states, these new bits, these qubits, right? They're not like traditional bits that are just 0 or 1. They can have these superpositions where they can be everything in between. And that means that they're very finicky. And that means that even if you can create a qubit, it might not reliably tell you what you want to know. It might not be a reliable store of information. And so today, for every time you have a qubit, you need another 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 qubits to error correct that one qubit. So when you hear we've created a 1,000 qubit computer, that's really maybe only one logical error corrected qubit. And so what's special around this Majorana 1 is that it's a completely new approach to designing the qubits. So you have this built-in error correction because it's topological, meaning that it's created in a way where rather than having kind of one part of the system contain all the information, you have two different particles, and then you look at the relationship between them, and that's more reliable from a physics-based perspective. And therefore, instead of needing thousands of qubits for error correction, you may only need 10 or 20 or 30. And so that's what's making it so exciting. When are we going to get this to a commercially useful state? Commercially useful quantum computers will have at least 100 logical qubits, and that could arrive already by the end of this decade. So kind of 27 at the near end to 2030 at the far end. Cryptography breaking quantum computers are probably still 10 years away. And if we're looking at some of the scales of what we need for scientific breakthroughs in material sciences and pharma, we're probably still around 15 years away.
Ben, do you do quantum now?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have a brilliant young man on my team who's a PhD in quantum computing from Cambridge.
Great.
So I'm learning slowly from him. But it is, we have an investment in a company from Australia, Q Control, that does software for quantum computers. And to Mad's point, it's not that far in the future. There are applications around quantum in our everyday lives already. I mean, MRI uses quantum technology effectively to check the behavior of atoms around magnetic fields. There's interesting work around quantum sensing. So this is using quantum sensors to track potentially, where you are in the world as alternatives to GPS, etc. So I think quantum has all sorts of implications also in the AI field. So, I think it's a fantastically exciting time. We will invest in this space. Again, it comes down to expectation versus reality. And in terms of the fund length, if you have a 10-year fund, you just have to be careful of timing it so the companies that you're investing in are going to have the impact within the life cycle of your fund.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about the Microsoft press release?
Well, I'm reliably informed that if you dig into the press release, some of the reviewers or the referees within Nature magazine were a little bit skeptical. I don't think that the theory is problematic in any way, but there is this element where, the big companies, if they're missing a bit of PR for that week, perhaps they can throw out something extremely technical and, keep everyone happy that they got lots of likes online, et cetera, a little bit, like the big announcements around AI. I sometimes just feel that these who's checking in 4, 5, 6 years time what they said in an article or a big announcement a few years ago really came true. I think sometimes the value of these things is in the announcement to make a politician look super good or a company look really clever. Where's the evidence? No one's going back to check these things. So, I mean, maybe that's me being a little bit harsh. I think it's fantastic and people should push the barriers.
We are. I mean, it's great. I think you made this point earlier, Ben. Europe is great. We have the R&D, we have the technicians, we have the engineers. So AI, quantum, fusion, all of these technologies that we're talking about are happening in Europe, which I think is something that we must always shout to the rooftops about. Now, staying with AI, Grok 3 is out, so ultra-fast development, trained on Colossus, 100,000 GPUs. It only took 3 months to train, which is much faster than GPT-4 and Sonnet 3.5. But what does this all mean, Mads? What's the output of all this speed?
We sort of talked about it a week or two ago, talking about that it was just about to drop, and it's a super impressive model. It's very, very fast. Quickly hit the top of the benchmarks, top of the chatbot arena. All the benchmarks are super impressive. The development speed has been very impressive. And it's interesting to see how this rivalry between Elon Musk and Sam Altman, kind of, X versus OpenAI, that's leading to this hyper-competitive atmosphere. As a working tool, I'd say the news analysis is really hard to beat because it's sifting basically straight from the X feed or the Twitter feed. When it comes to doing work, kind of the file and the project work, it's not quite there yet. It's not bad, but some of the other models like Anthropic's Claude and OpenAI's ChatGPT are still better. On the OpenAI side, we know that ChatGPT or GPT 4.5 could be out as early as next week, and GPT-5 may be released as early as May. While we're at it, quick shout out to Evo 2 that was also out this week. So Evo 2 is a massive biological foundation model. It's got 40 billion parameters, so it's smaller than the big LLMs like a GPT 3.5 or GPT-4. It's been trained on data sourced from over 128,000 genomes across all domains of life. So plants, animals, bacteria, and more. And it's a foundational model that gives us predictive powers on DNA. So we can think a little bit about it like a biological ChatGPT. It can help answer questions like how a mutation affects a gene's function, and therefore it's useful in things like cancer research. So I think it's so fascinating. I think we talk about how AI is going to bring us closer to solving, curing cancer and doing some of these things. It's exactly these types of technological milestones that bring us closer to those types of breakthroughs.
We're super future focused today. I mean, the latest AI, the quantum, the fusion. This all feels like the kind of dialogue that is, oh yeah, that's 10 years away, that's 10 years away. It feels like there has been some steps forwards. I mean, we're going to talk about fusion next. Now, France is continuing to nail their tech PR. They're so bloody good at it. Macron has like really nailed this whole tech. The French tech PR engine is back in. We're talking star stuff. We're talking unlimited energy from fusion. The CEA's West Tokamak reactor has produced 22 minutes of continuous fusion. And that's what goes on inside the sun. It's a new record. I think China was 17 minutes. Mads, you'll have to correct me there. There's lots to unpack. Can fusion come online soon enough to create some of our energy requirements? This is very exciting. It's a new record, but Mads, tell us a little bit what's happening on the fusion side.
Yeah, it feels like in all the doom and gloom, it actually feels like some of all these things, as you're saying, are coming together. Fusion energy is important because a single gram of hydrogen isotopes, they can yield the equivalent of 11 tons of coal. And so it's the dream of unlimited clean energy that we potentially have in our hands here. Now, fusion has been super elusive. For decades, it was said that the only really reliable piece of R&D or kind of result that's come out of all the R&D has been this number 40, which is that it was said that fusion was always 40 years away. Kind of that was sort of the iron rule of fusion research. The difficulty is in making the process sufficiently stable that you can reach these temperatures you need. So high energy plasma continuously stable without damaging the reactor. And so in January, a team of Chinese researchers, they managed, as you say, to get to 17 minutes of continuous output. But this week, a French team managed to get to 22 minutes just a month later. So boom, take that for European tech. What a wonderful thing. Now, the question, of course, is what will it take to go commercial? We're not there yet. There are a couple of things you need to do. You need to achieve continuous net energy gain for an extended period of time. And so the kind of scaling this continuous operation from minutes to days, weeks, months, years. We also need to address some of the fuel cycle challenges and make sure we have enough deuterium and tritium to be able to run the reactors. So the timelines are short term. In the next kind of 5 years, we're expecting to do continuous experimental milestones to refine the reactor design and bring some of these gain cycles from 22 minutes and up and get it further up. Medium term, it's probably next decade, building and testing demo reactors. And then longer term, and we're talking probably 2040s onwards, commercial rollout. And so, look, it's easy again to be cynical, 15, 20 years away. But if we think about it, what if we only have 15 to 20 years until we're at a place where we have limitless clean energy? Wouldn't that be a pretty remarkable thing? So just think it's worth kind of stopping and reflecting on some of these milestones here.
I totally agree. And also, if this kind of 40-year milestone has been halved or more, I mean, I think let's hope that's right. I love that it's all happening in Europe, as you say. It feels like there have been some real inroads. I mean, 22 minutes doesn't sound long, but I think in fusion terms, that is pretty bloody long. So let's keep on going, Europe. I want to quickly talk about some data that Peter Walker from Carter released this week. And I think anecdotally, we all felt this, but he was looking at round sizes for startups over the last 5 years. And he's come up with these two competing theories around VC-backed startups. And I'm going to throw in some new VC buzzword bingo, see if you can pick it up. And these theories feel to me a bit Jevons paradox-y. So theory one, here we go. AI is making everything about building a company cheaper. Yeah. Startups need less cash than ever before, and this is likely to continue. So this is very much leaning into Sam Altman's solo unicorn founder theory, which I think is a really interesting thought experiment. Theory two. So AI is lowering the barrier, thereby increasing competition, therefore making the cash advantage actually more important as startups scale. I.e., you can start for less, but ultimately winning a category is going to cost you more than ever. So what does the data say? So he took a snapshot of median round sizes over the last 5 years. Across most stages, rounds are smaller than they were 5 years ago, adjusted for inflation. The major outliers being the very, very early stages of pre and seed. Therefore, is seed the new A? Could it be that companies are raising larger seed rounds in the explicit attempt to not need another fundraise? And somebody then coined the term venture light or seed strapping, or to be a seed strap startup. Are larger funds now playing at seed where their fund economics demand companies raise significant amounts of cash, or the numbers no longer make sense? So Mads, we've always had a sense of this, especially as with us pre-seed and seed. Where do you want to take this topic?
I think it's interesting to see how some of the data plays out, and also some of the anecdotes. And, there's so much speculation. I saw one of the founders, I think it was from Gamma, interviewed recently. And the headline of the story, I think, was in the New York Times, was that exactly as you're saying here, with AI, we can build companies much more efficiently, we can scale revenue, and therefore we don't need to raise so much money or build so big teams. And the takeaway from the story was, yes, that's kind of what they've done, but they're on their way out to raise more money so they can build bigger teams. And I think at the end of the day, the loss of economics will always apply. If you've got two teams that are equally good with the same type of technology, and one has got more resource and more money, they can acquire more customers and they're going to win the market at the end of the day. And so I think there will always be a market for capital and investment, because, it's not just building the product, it's also making the product better. It's also distribution. It's also all the other things that go around creating a big, successful company. And if you have more resource, you've got better chances of doing that. The caveat is when you're very early and you're still figuring out how to get to product market fit, too much resource can distract you. You don't want to become too bloated or get too big too soon. You want to make sure you're very judicious around how you raise and how you spend, kind of always, but certainly very, very early on. But then I think once you're a product market fit, more money is going to put you in a better position. And we've seen this in the LLM space, right? All the big frontier model companies are raising a lot of money because being first to market and having the resource and being able to hire the best people still matters. I love Peter Walker's analysis. I think it's really good. He's always has got great data and great analysis of it. And I think his takeaway was along the lines of, look, there's just still a lot that's happening here. Watch this space.
Ben, you're later than us. You're from the growth perspective. But have you got any thoughts on these two theories?
Yeah, I think it is interesting. I know there is a different type of company that we're looking at these days compared to 5-7 years ago. I think SaaS companies were very much in the limelight back then, and a good SaaS company would develop its product over time. It would improve its product over time, and you would see that its revenue would grow more steadily as the product improved and it got out there and sold its product. It was a gradual impact on revenue. Now, if we're looking at deep tech companies, a lot of the work happens very early on, perhaps even before the company goes to the customer, if they're creating a piece of technology. So for us as a growth investor, waiting till a company like that gets to 10, 20 million in revenue, it may be too late because they become too visible. Once you have an amazing piece of technology that is being monetized, everybody's on it. So for
does that mean
sure,
you'll come downstream?
Yes, I think we will have to.
All right, okay.
Yeah. We have to take a view of the value of the technology and have some way of equating that to what we used to call revenue at a certain point and say there's so much inherent value there. We can come in perhaps as a growth investor. We really need to see some revenue. So we're not coming into the seed stage. The revaluation, of course, in 2022 that we talked about earlier did change some of the aspects of the way these companies grow. There was the growth at all costs mantra out there in the past, which was, burn cash, get users, and think about profitability in the future. I think investors are much more focused now on, can you reach profitability very quickly? Is it in your own hands?
My sense is we're moving slightly out of that black swan memo, get to profitability, stretch your timelines. I have no data to back this up, but my sense is that we're now moving, but not to the crazy grow at all costs, crush the world, cash be damned. But I think there is an argument for some startups to start putting their foot back down on the gas and kind of get into growth and put it all into kind of the marketing and the sales column again. But we'll see. Awesome. So I want to highlight a quick deal of the week before we close off. So I was looking at Carmen Plus this week, which is a Dutch-US startup that builds autonomous spacecraft that can travel to asteroids and then mine them for materials. They've raised $20 million. And they're looking to do their first launch in 2027, which is around the corner. Now, the reason it caught my eye was because when Elon was starting SpaceX and Starlink, and I thought, oh, this is whatever, 5-10 years ago. I thought, oh, this is mining rights. So my assumption was all of this push into space was we're running out of stuff on Earth, guys and girls. We need to go and get some more stuff from somewhere. It's on asteroids. It's on other planets. So my assumption, it was all, that push from him was all mining rights. And so seeing Carbon Plus just reminded me of that conversation in my head. Now, I don't know if anyone has any perspectives on this, but maybe Ben, do you have any thoughts on an asteroid mining startup? I guess, would you invest?
I think we would look at it for sure. It does sound a long way down the line, gosh. I think when we do invest in space, and we've got some fantastic space companies in our portfolio, they're much more in the current space economy where there's revenues coming in and there's natural use cases. I think it sounds wonderful. I think it sounds like the plot to a Hollywood movie. Perhaps there might have even been a couple of 90s Hollywood movies, but I think Bruce Willis is unavailable.
Yeah, I was going to say, where was Bruce Willis? It was with who was Steve Tyler's, Liv Tyler, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm up for that. I'm up for whatever it was called, version 2. Starring Elon Musk and actually, if he goes to Mars, that's
and
fine.
Danbo,
Yeah, I'm in. I'll polish off my acting chops. Mads, would you invest? Would we invest in a space asteroid mining company? Maybe we'd look at it.
Yeah, I think yes and no. And I think this sort of goes to the heart of a challenge. It's something I think we need to think about as an industry. Because I think historically, some of this stuff is stuff that would have been funded by government research labs, right? NASA's been putting lots of money into, taking mankind to boldly go where no one has gone before and all that stuff for decades. And that's wonderful. I think there's so much more you can do in a commercial setting because we just know once there is a profit kind of incentive, everybody becomes more focused on efficiency, and it's just a better way to build and do. At the same time, if you look at the type of capital that's required very early on, to Ben's point, Ben, he's a growth type investor and they really need to see some revenue. And guess what? When you're building satellites to go mine asteroids, there probably ain't going to be much revenue the first few years. And we sit at our end, and for us to write a check into a round like this, well, the check's as big as half our fund, right? Yeah. So, and this is the seed check. So what is the type of fund we need that can fund these types of probably worthwhile endeavors that could yield great and profitable returns at some point in the future where the fund is big enough but can invest early enough and can you make all the fund economics work? And I think we've seen some of it in the States where Andreessen have had their American dynamism and have been pushing sort of that notion. I don't know if we quite have that type of investment firm.
Should we?
In Europe yet? Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's exactly what we should have. I think one is not enough. I think we need to build a whole industry of venture investors. It won't be seed investing like what we know it today, right? It's not $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million to write some software and get to market within a couple of months and then boom, off you go. It's much longer horizons. There's much more risk. The payoffs could be incredible. Wouldn't it be great if we could build another 5 or 10 SpaceX type companies in Europe? But it requires a different kind of investing.
We've got our UK spaceport down in Cornwall. We've got our broken 747 that was supposed to lob satellites of that kind of arc takeoff to lob satellites into space. So we can rev that up, I'm sure.
I'd like to think we can get beyond Monty Python at some point, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I think on this point, it is still governments that decide the winners in this space. It's still the government money which chooses which company, which strategy, because they're the first lost piece, really. They're the ones taking the risk.
Ben, what's happening for you this week?
I'm actually heading to Doha for Web Summit. A couple of days down there. Lots of great companies, obviously lots of potential investors from that region as well. Having said that, it's not easy for funds to raise to the Middle East as well. The Middle East is very inwardly focused right now and building their own ecosystems. But really looking forward to that.
And Mads, you're off traveling as well, aren't you?
That's right. I'll be in the Far East talking at a conference there on AI and how kind of AI is transforming and continues to transform the investing lab.
Well, it's great because as soon as you go away, we sign more term sheets, so that's fine.
I just have to stay away. That's it.
Just go away and we'll be absolutely fine. Gents, what a gift. What a pleasure. Thank you so much. Catch you next time.
See you next time. Okay. Bye.